Aryna Sabalenka is the #1 player in the world. In Toronto this month, she did not sell out her session. The 25th seed did, 10,000 seats, gone in 30 minutes for a second-round match. Not a final, not a semi-final, a second-round match played by a woman ranked outside the top 20 at the time the tickets went on sale. The man who runs that tournament has been doing the job for 20 years, 2 decades of finals, 2 decades of every kind of crowd a major event can produce. He said he has never seen a player outside the top 5 do anything like it. Not once. In 20 years. And here is the part that should not make sense. That was not the first time. It happened in Melbourne in January, where hundreds of people packed into a small outside court and the line stretched back toward the main stadium. It happened in Dubai in February, in a country on the other side of the world where an entire arena chanted her name while she was being beaten 6-62. It happened in London in July, at Wimbledon, the most reserved crowd in the sport. It happened in Washington last week, where rain pushed a final to a Monday and the tournament chairman looked out at what came back and said it might be the greatest Monday crowd anyone has ever seen. 5 countries, 4 continents, same phenomenon. So let me ask you the actual question, because it is not the one people keep answering. How does a 21-year-old from a country with no tennis history, no tennis tradition, and no tennis star before her walk into 5 different nations and find a home crowd already sitting there waiting for her? And before you answer, let me take away the easy options. It is not because she is a top 5 player. She is not. It is not because she won a Grand Slam. She has not. It is not tour marketing, because the WTA did not build this and openly admits it did not see it coming. It is not even because she started winning. And I'm going to prove that to you in about 90 seconds with a date that breaks the whole theory. Every obvious explanation for this is wrong. So the question is not whether Alex Eala is popular. Popular is easy. The question is how the crowd got there first. And the answer is not a tennis answer. You will not find it in a ranking, a draw sheet, or a highlight reel. It is a number, one number, and it is roughly 10 million. But before I tell you what 10 million refers to, I need to show you the date that kills every other explanation. Before we get to the number, you need one fact that breaks the obvious explanation. Because the obvious explanation is that she got good, and then the crowds came. That is how it works for everybody. You win, you get famous people by ticket. Simple. That is not what happened here, and I can show you exactly where the timeline falls apart. But first, who she actually is, because a lot of you are meeting her for the first time. Alexandra Maniego Eala was born May 23, 2005 in Quezon City in Metro Manila. She picked up a racket at 4. At 12, she left home for the Rafa Nadal Academy in Manacor, Spain, 5,000 miles from her family, and she stayed. She graduated from that academy in 2023. Her list of firsts is almost absurd when you read it in one go. First Filipino to win a junior Grand Slam singles title, the US Open Girls in 2022. First Filipino to crack the top 30. First Filipino to beat a top 10 player. First Filipino to reach the second week of a major. First Filipino to win a WTA Tour title. That last one happened 11 days ago. August 3rd, Washington, D.C. She played Jessica Pegula, the world number 3, in the final. She lost the first set 4-6. Rain suspended the match overnight and pushed it to a Monday. She came back the next day, took the second 6-4, and then won the third set 6-love. 6-0, against the third best player on the planet, to become the first champion her country has ever had. She is now ranked 20th in the world, career high. So that is the resume. And if the crowds had started after that, this video would not exist. It would just be a story about a winner. Here is the problem. Go back to January. Australian Open. First round. Melbourne Park. Court 6. A small outside court, the kind they give to players nobody is expecting to watch. At that moment, Alex Eala had never won a main draw match at a Grand Slam. Not one. In her entire life. And people poured into Melbourne Park anyway, hundreds of them. The line to get onto that court stretched back toward Rod Laver Arena, the 20,000-seat main stadium. There was not an empty spot anywhere, not in the seats, not at the courtside bar, not on the concrete ledges. Behind the baseline, people stood on anything that held weight for a player with 0 Grand Slam wins on Court 6, so the crowd did not follow the success. The crowd was already there 7 months before the trophy, which means it was built out of something that existed before she did anything at all. And I want to be clear about why this matters beyond one player. Because this is not a fan club story. The National Bank Open in Toronto expected more than 200,000 attendees this year. It projects close to $60 million in national economic impact. Over 70 million people watch it on broadcast worldwide. These are not small numbers, and they do not move because one athlete is likable. When a 25th seed forces an event that size to change its scheduling, something structural is happening underneath. And nobody else on tour has this. Not the world number one, not the reigning Wimbledon champion. Nobody in the top 30 travels with a crowd that assembles before she arrives. If you have ever watched one of her matches and thought the atmosphere sounded wrong for the ranking, you are not imagining it, and you are about 4 minutes away from knowing exactly why. Stick with me, because the answer reorganizes how you read the entire WTA calendar. And I want to hear whether you saw it coming. Because in January, in Melbourne, she had never won a main draw match at a major in her life. Not one. And the lines still stretched back toward Rod Laver Arena. They were not there for her ranking, which means they were there for something that was already waiting. I want to walk you through 4 facts. Try to solve this before I do. Because every single one of them makes this harder to explain. Not easier. Start with Toronto. When the tournament scheduled her second-round match, they put her on the grandstand court. That is a reasonable decision. The grandstand holds 2,800 people. She was the 25th seed. 2,800 seats for a 25th seed is generous. Then the tickets went on sale. By the time anyone at that tournament understood what was happening, roughly 5,000 tickets had moved for that session. 5,000 people for a court that holds 2,800, almost double capacity. They had to physically relocate her match to center court, which holds 10,000, and center court sold out too. In half an hour, a 25th seed just forced one of the biggest tournaments in the world to redraw its schedule. Who does that? Name another player outside the top 10 who has ever done that. I have looked, I cannot find one now. Fact 2, and this is the one that stopped me cold for weeks. Dubai, February. The Dubai Duty Free Championships, a WTA 1000 event in United Arab Emirates. Eala was ranked around 40th in the world. She drew Coco Gauff in the quarterfinals, an American, a multiple Grand Slam champion, the number 4 player alive. Gauff won 6-love, 6-2. 12 games to 2. It was not competitive, it was over in about an hour, and the entire stadium was chanting for Eala, not politely supporting the underdog. Chanting. Gauff described it later as the crowd being overwhelmingly for her opponent, turning a neutral quarterfinal into something that felt like a road game. In Dubai. Now think about that for 1 second. Not Manila, not Miami, not anywhere in Southeast Asia. A city in the Persian Gulf, roughly 4,000 miles from the Philippines, hosting a tournament that has nothing to do with either country. Why Dubai? That is the question I could not answer. And every explanation I tried collapsed within about 30 seconds. Fact 3. And this one is genuinely strange behavior. July 6th, Wimbledon, 4th round. Eala versus Jasmine Paolini. The match is being played in London, roughly 6,000 miles from Manila, which in Philippine time means it is happening late at night. Back in Pasig, in Metro Manila, they opened the Phil Sports Arena. Not for a match, for a watch party. To show the broadcast on a screen, fans filled an entire side of the arena. Hundreds more sat in folding chairs arranged on the playing floor, the actual floor, facing a screen. Organizers handed out small Philippine flags. The crowd erupted after every point she won and applauded rallies. The tennis broadcast was scheduled immediately after the national basketball team played Australia in a World Cup qualifier, and people stayed. So they bought their way into an arena to watch television, late at night, for a sport their country does not play. What produces that behavior? Because I promise you it is not a tennis broadcast. And now fact 4, which is the one that breaks the entire thing open, or rather breaks it further. Let us talk about the country itself. The Philippines is a basketball nation. Not casually, obsessively. For decades, the entire national sporting attention has funneled into basketball, and after that, boxing. There is no tennis tradition there. No club system feeding the Pro Tour. No clay courts. No Grand Slam history. Before Eala, there was no Filipino tennis star of any kind, at any level, ever. And it gets worse. Most of her matches are not even available on free television in the Philippines. The broadcast rights are too expensive. Oh, watch her live. Filipinos have largely had to pay for cable or an online subscription. A media analyst put it directly when comparing her to Manny Pacquiao. Pacquiao had theater showings. Pacquiao had free TV. Pacquiao could rearrange the Sunday schedule of an entire country. Eala is behind a paywall. So add it all up. A country with no tennis history, no tennis stars, no tennis infrastructure, a population that mostly cannot watch her live without paying for it. In a sport that ranks somewhere below basketball, boxing, volleyball and billiards in the national consciousness. And that country is currently generating the loudest, largest, most disruptive crowds in professional tennis in cities 10,000 miles from Manila, in countries that have nothing to do with the Philippines. For a player who had not won a single major match when it started, nothing about the tennis explains this, nothing about her ranking explains it. Nothing about the sport's popularity at home explains it. Because the sport is not popular at home. Which means the answer was never in the tennis at all. Close the rankings. You are looking at the wrong document. Open a migration map. There are more than 10.5 million Filipinos living and working outside the Philippines. It is one of the largest diasporas on earth. Spread across more than 100 countries, not immigrants who arrived last year, communities decades-old, generations deep, with their own neighborhoods, their own churches, their own grocery stores, their own newspapers. Now watch what happens when you lay that map over the WTA calendar. The United States, roughly 2.9 million Filipinos. That is the largest concentration anywhere outside the Philippines itself. The WTA plays Miami, Washington, Cincinnati, the U.S. Open in New York, Canada, 957,000. The WTA plays the Canadian Open in Toronto, the United Arab Emirates, 680,000. The WTA plays Dubai, Australia, 410,000. The WTA plays the Australian Open in Melbourne, the United Kingdom, 164,000. The WTA plays Wimbledon. Read those two lists again side by side. It is the same list in roughly the same order of size. Nobody planned that. There is no conspiracy and no strategy. It is a coincidence of history, and it is the single most valuable coincidence in this sport right now, because here is what it means, and this is the part that reorganized how I watch her. Alex Eala is not touring. Every other player on that tour is playing away matches 40 weeks a year, occasionally going home. Eala is doing the exact opposite. She is making a lap around her own community. She has 40 home venues and almost no away ones. Think about how insane that advantage is if you put it in American terms. Imagine the NBA had, 50 years before Kevin Durant was born, quietly installed a Durant section in every single arena in the league. Sold out. Waiting. All he has to do is show up wearing the right jersey. That is what 100 years of Filipino migration built, and then a 21-year-old walked into the middle of it with a racket. Now go back and watch those 4 impossible facts collapse. Dubai. The one I could not solve. 680,000 Filipinos live in the United Arab Emirates. Filipino workers are woven into that entire economy. In hospitals, in hotels, in construction, in service. That was not a neutral crowd adopting an underdog. That was a Filipino crowd in a Filipino city, in the sense that matters. The question answers itself in about 1 second, and I spent weeks on it because I was reading the wrong data. Toronto. Here is the detail that nails it shut. The Toronto metropolitan area is home to 29.4% of every Filipino in Canada, the single largest concentration in the country. They make up roughly 4.6% of the city's population. When Eala walked onto center court at SoBi Stadium, she was not being adopted by a Canadian crowd. She was being received by a Filipino one that had been in that city since the 1960s. Some of those families have been in Toronto for 60 years. They were there before she was born. They were there before her parents were born. Melbourne, January, Court 6. 410,000 Filipinos in Australia, a huge share of them in Melbourne. Of course, the line stretched back to Rod Laver Arena. She did not need a ranking. She needed a postcode. And that also explains the thing that made no sense at all. The crowd arrived before the success, because the crowd was never assembled by the success. It was already standing there. It had been standing there for decades, waiting for literally anyone from that country to walk onto a court worth showing up for. She is not building a fan base. She inherited one. If that reframed anything for you, I would actually like to know. Drop the city you are watching from in the comments. Because I have a suspicion the map in that comment section is going to look exactly like the one I just read out, and I want to see if I am right. So that is the geography, and the geography is airtight. It explains Toronto, it explains Dubai, it explains Melbourne, it explains why the lines formed before the winds did, but a map only tells you where 10 million people are standing. It does not tell you why any of them reach into their pocket, and that question has a much harder answer. A map tells you where 10 million people are. It does not tell you why a nurse in Toronto, coming off a night shift, buys a ticket she cannot really afford, for a sport she did not grow up watching, to see a 21-year-old she has never met. For that you need one more number. $37. 2 billion. That is what overseas Filipinos send home in remittances in a single year, roughly 8.5% of the entire national economy. It makes the Philippines the fourth largest remittance-receiving country on the planet. Sit with what that number actually describes. These are not people who moved abroad for adventure. 43% of overseas Filipino workers are in what the government classifies as elementary occupations: cleaners, caregivers, domestic workers, nurses, construction crews. Nearly 6 in 10 are women. They left an archipelago, took jobs other people did not want, in countries where the language was not theirs, and then wired the money back. They left in order to provide. That is the deal. That is the entire emotional architecture of that diaspora. A Philippine Star column captured what the ticket sales cannot. Migrants stretching budgets to afford seats, showing up in bad weather, waving a flag for a homeland that has not always given them much to cheer about. The writer called it the same emotional math that used to fill arenas for Manny Pacquiao. That is the answer. For 50 years, that community has been sending things home. Money, medicine, school fees, boxes at Christmas. Alex Eala is the first thing in a long time that came back the other direction, which brings me to the second piece, because this community did not have to learn how to do this. They had already rehearsed it for 20 years. ESPN put it about as well as it can be put. Eala has done something almost no Filipino athlete has ever managed. She has made a basketball nation stay up past midnight to watch tennis. 2 decades earlier, Pacquiao inspired the exact same devotion. His fights brought the country to a complete standstill. Whether they landed on a Sunday morning in Manila or a Saturday night in Las Vegas, the behavior was already installed. The arena watch parties, the flags, the staying up until 3 in the morning, the treating one person's result as a national event. None of that was invented for her. Was waiting for someone to point it at, and Pacquiao himself handed it over within hours of her winning Washington. He posted this down in the first round: Pero Bimangan Yen Ong Puso Ong Filipino. Congrats Alex Eala, our new champion, down in the first set, but she got back up. That is the heart of the Filipino, the most famous athlete in that country's history, publicly calling a tennis player our new champion. That is not a congratulations, that is a transfer of custody. Now the third piece, and this is the one that turns a demographic advantage into loyalty, because 10 million people can be near you and still not care about you. Watch what she does the moment a match ends in Toronto. After beating Alicia Parks, the first thing she did before anything else was turn to the crowd and speak to them in Filipino. Kamusta Teong na in Toronto, I wage way Neong na yung mga bandila nayo at Patinjan. How are we tonight, Toronto? Wave your flag so I can see them. She speaks English, she speaks Spanish fluently. After a decade in Spain, she could have said anything to the cameras. She chose the language only the stands understood. And now go back to where we started. 10,000 seats, 30 minutes, a second-round match. That number is not a marketing statistic. It is 10 million people scattered across 100 countries, discovering that for the first time in their lives, somebody is carrying that flag into the cities they already live in. There is one more line, and honestly, it is the reason I wanted to make this video at all. Back in January, in Auckland, after a 3-hour comeback win, she was asked about the Filipino fans who had carried her through it. If there is one thing I learned in 2025, it is that home is the people and not the place. For almost any other athlete, that is a nice quote, something you put on a graphic. For 10 million people who left an archipelago to feed their families, that is not a quote, that is a description of their life. That is the sentence they have been trying to explain to their children for 40 years. She was not talking about tennis, she was talking about them. So the crowd was never really about tennis at all, which leaves one question standing, and it is the one this sport has not thought about yet. What happens when it arrives somewhere bigger? So here is the answer. Alex Eala has a home crowd in every city because 10 million people got there first. The map was finished decades before she was born, drawn by nurses and caregivers and construction workers and domestic helpers who left an archipelago to feed people back home. She is not building that crowd. She is the first person from that country good enough to stand in the middle of it holding a racket. And before we finish, one correction, because you are going to see a lot of people sell you a version of this that is not true. She is not a rags to riches story. Her mother was a national swimmer who won a bronze medal at the 1985 Southeast Asian Games and then became the chief financial officer of Globe Telecom, one of the largest companies in the Philippines. Her father is a business executive. One uncle ran the Philippine Basketball Association and later chaired the Philippine Sports Commission. Another is a fashion designer. Her brother played college tennis at Penn State. That is an elite Manila sporting family, and pretending otherwise is lazy. But here is what that privilege actually bought. It bought a racket at 4 years old and a plane ticket to Manicure at 12. It did not buy a world ranking of 20. It did not buy 6-0 against Jessica Pegula in a final. And it absolutely did not buy 10 million people, because if money could buy that, somebody would have done it 100 years ago. Now look at what is coming. In 3 weeks she plays the US Open in New York, and the United States is the single largest entry on that entire migration map, roughly 2.9 million Filipinos, more than Canada, the UAE, Australia, and the United Kingdom combined. Arthur Ashe Stadium seats more than 23,000 people. It is the largest tennis stadium on the planet, and it sells itself on being the loudest. Toronto seats 10,000, and it went in half an hour. Nobody in this sport actually knows what that looks like at more than twice the size. The WTA does not know, the tournament does not know, the broadcasters do not know, and I would bet real money that most of them still have not open the map I just showed you. We find out in 3 weeks. I'm going to be covering every match of that run, and what I'm really watching for is the moment the sport realizes the crowd is not a novelty and never was. So stay with me for that, because it is the story I want to follow all the way through. And before you go, give me your number. If 10,000 seats in Toronto disappeared in 30 minutes, what does New York do? Put it in the comments and I will read them back on the day it happens.